Denise is the founder and director of the Wild Dolphin Project and spent, I think, 32 years now observing dolphins in the wild. She and I have a research project joint between Georgia Tech and the Wild Dolphin Project, where we were trying to really look at two-way communication with wild dolphins. She's going to give us an overview today of her work, and towards the end I'm going to show you some of the stuff that you all can get into, especially if you have some background in machine learning. So thank you very much for coming, Denise. Shall we?
Well, it's great to be here. I'm glad you're all here and listening. So like Thad said, I'm going to share with you a little bit about our general dolphin work and how we work in the field and how we analyze data. And then we're going to talk about our joint projects and see if we can intrigue any of you into the machine learning world of dolphin sounds. So every 20 years, National Geographic covers our work in the field. And a couple years ago, they did another story about thinking like a dolphin. And our work was highlighted very much because Thad and I have been working on trying to crack the code of dolphin communication in a couple different ways. Now, the reason we really think dolphins have some potential, they're kind of like primates in the water. On the upper left, you see an example of encephalization quotient, which is the physical measure of intelligence. In some ways, it's a brain-to-body ratio. And humans have an EQ of about 7, and dolphins are just second to humans, even above the great apes. So we know they have the physical structure for intelligence. They use tools in the wild. They've been known to understand artificially presented languages, comprehending both syntax and semantics. And they recognize themselves in mirrors, which is no small feat, apparently. But one of the big questions still is, do they have language? Do any non-human animals have language? And my particular perspective is that we really haven't looked close enough. We suspect, if you're a biologist, you tend to suspect that animals are doing a lot of complex communication. We just haven't cracked the code because we haven't had the tools. Now, collaboration with Thad is based on two different strategies. The first is decoding the dolphin's natural sounds. So like he was mentioning, we have a 32-year underwater acoustic and behavioral data set where we want to try to correlate sounds and behaviors and look at some of the really detailed categories of their sounds using kind of an anthropological framework, so knowing their society, the individuals, because it's a small resident group. And the second way is to interface with technology directly, creating some kind of two-way interface where we can start exploring perhaps a mutual language and maybe learning back and forth from both these strategies. So first I'm going to tell you a little bit about the specific dolphins that we work with and how we're approaching the dolphin signals themselves. A little bit about how we analyze these signals, some of the challenges working underwater with dolphin communication. And keeping in mind that we use computers all the time as biologists, and it's a really good marriage, and it's a really necessary tool. So dolphins have a lot of different senses. Of course, they're great acousticians, but they also have pretty good vision, especially species that live in clear water, and they have cross-modal abilities between vision and sound. They have taste, they do not have smell, and they have touch. And in the water, tissue in water has about the same acoustic impedance, so they can actually feel sound. So this becomes another way they communicate. So this is a summary of the history of dolphin communication, using one of Gary Larson's slides, showing that primarily we've worked in captivity. We've tried to look at acoustics, and believe it or not, we've been looking for English, which is a little scary. A little antiquated. So here you have the slide, and the scientists are hearing habla español and other Spanish phrases, and they have no idea what they're hearing, but they're writing it down. So we've progressed at least. We want to look and see what the dolphins themselves are doing and how they might structure a communication system for a complex aquatic society. So we basically correlate video with sound.
I'm Cindy Rogers, and I'm the research assistant at the Wild Dolphin Project. Hi, and I'm Michelle Green. I'm a graduate student here.
So, you know, it's funny. I was thinking when I was in graduate school, one of my teachers told me there were only a couple people in the world who could read a spectrogram for human speech, right? This is how old I am. And now, of course, computers do it. But we use the basic technique with dolphins. We take our video, we run the audio track that correlates with the behavior, some dolphin aggression, will fight. So it's a busy place. There's a lot of sounds. There's a lot of dolphins making sounds. We don't always know who's making what sound, which is another issue. So our project is in the Bahamas. So here you see the coast of Florida. Across the Gulf Stream are the shallow sandbanks of the Bahamas, and the dolphins live there. It's great underwater visibility, which is why I chose to work there, because I wanted to see what these animals were doing underwater, not just looking at the surface, which is the case in most parts of the world. My nonprofit had a boat donated, yay, in 1992, which is a great ocean-going vessel. So we live there for 4 to 5 months a year. We do our work there, we sleep there, we cook there, we analyze data out there, and we go where the dolphins are, basically. And my main tool is underwater video with a hydrophone, underwater microphone, of course, simply to correlate sound and behavior and try to get as much data with that equipment. Our project is pretty non-invasive. We don't grab or tag the animals. And we have about 300 individuals tracked over the decades. And we're on our 4th generation. So we track that as well. Now, the species is actually a quite convenient species to work with. They're Atlantic spotted dolphins, and they don't have any spots when they're born. So here you see a mother, fully grown, she's 35 years old here. And we use classic ID techniques. We look at dorsal fin nicks and notches, which most people use from surface work. But because we work underwater, we can also look at body marks, full body marks. And because there are spots, we track their spots, which are kind of like constellations of stars. So we do this ID work every summer because they gain spots with age. And so we actually know all our dolphins, and most of which were born certain years. So we kind of take the broad overview, the anthropological framework. So we sex our dolphins because, again, we're in the water. And if you want a little take-home tidbit to tell your kids or your significant others, you can tell them you now know that to sex a female dolphin, you look at the mammary slits on the underside because, of course, they nurse their young. We know their reproductive status. They're pregnant for about a year. They'll have 3 to 4 years in between having calves. We know the females associate with each other by reproductive status. So if some are pregnant, they'll hang out with other pregnant dolphins. And the males have lifelong friendships that they form when they're juveniles. And their job is to not only try to mate with females, but to protect the group and try to scout out sharks and that sort of thing. So we understand the society a fair amount, so we have a lot of metadata around our acoustic data as well. And we do know some things about dolphin sounds. We know they make whistles, specifically signature whistles, which are actually names. So these are long-distance communication signals that go 3 to 5 miles in the water, for example. They make burst pulses, which are very funny sounding sounds, very hard to categorize, but they're very social. This is probably the most common type of dolphin sound and the least studied. Then we have echolocation clicks, which of course we know a lot about from Navy work. And then we have compressed echolocation clicks, which we call buzzes, and these are social sounds, unlike clicks for navigation. And these buzzes are used in courtship and discipline. So we have some basic correlations about what sounds they make with kind of gross behaviors. But what we'd really like to do is look at the greater complexity potential. Now, dolphin research is always about 25 years behind terrestrial research. For example, we've known since, I think, 1992 that vervet monkeys use different kinds of alarm calls to communicate that different kinds of predators are coming. So very specific, there's an eagle coming or a leopard coming, so their kin can take the appropriate action. Some fantastic work with prairie dogs that really shows the complexity of the kind of information that can be encoded in a very short alarm call, including things like a human with a yellow shirt on walking across a field with a gun or not a gun, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things these animals are doing. And you can imagine a scenario where a dolphin would be pretty handy if you could communicate whether the hammerhead shark was coming towards you or a tiger shark or a great white shark. It might really determine if you survive or not. So again, we suspect there's a lot of information there we don't know about. So the big question really with dolphin sounds at least are, and all animal communication for that matter, are the signals referential, meaning they refer to something, they label something like a name or a word for an object, or are they graded? Do the sounds run into each other? Do they just show things like increasing intensity of sound if I'm going to talk really loud or really fast? That would be kind of a graded system versus a discrete word or referential signal. So this is one really big debate in animal communication. And dolphins have both types of signals. We know signature whistles, for example, their names, are technically a referential signal. They can call each other and they can broadcast their own name. But is it language? And this is where we really fall short in our tools to look at, is there more complexity in the order, structure, potential grammar of their sounds? Now, dolphin communication is also very complicated for the researcher because they're really good at what they do acoustically. They have a pretty neat system for creating sound and receiving sound, and probably the big message here is they're very directional. So they send out very high frequency signals up to, looks like 240 kilohertz. High frequency out this way, low frequencies drop off to the side. And they receive the sound through their lower jaw, through a fatty organ. They don't have external ears like we do. Same thing, they receive sound directionally. And to make it more complicated for the researcher, if you want to get a head-on signal and get the full high frequency, the dolphins can internally steer their sound 20 degrees off, and you would have no physical signal that they're doing that. So it's a little challenging to get a head-on signal. So when you're trying to localize a vocalizer, and you see on the right side of the screen here, a 4-hydrophone array that helps us triangulate who's making sounds. And this technology, actually, we're just starting to incorporate with some new equipment. So lots of times we don't even know who's making the sound in these big groups. So very challenging for the data. Again, collecting ultrasounds has been pretty recent, at least in our work. On the lower left, you see an example of the spectrogram, the whistle that you've been hearing. And the full picture is the ultrasound above about 110 kilohertz. And hopefully you can see on the far right, there are some harmonics that now start showing up in this high frequency sound spectrogram. You see places where, of course, the clicks go broadband. And we always knew that. We just didn't have the equipment to record it. And you see some places where the narrowband signal wouldn't even be recognized. There's no information in the narrowband, but there's information in the high band. Now, historically, we've used a lot of different techniques, and whistles have been fairly well studied primarily, and I hate to say it, but they're easiest to measure, right? We can measure contours. We're pretty good at visual pattern recognition. Here you see examples of 4 signature whistles from different dolphins, and you can tell they're quite different. You can imagine the dolphins can tell that as well. And we can measure their basic parameters. Early on, we also used neural nets. If we had enough samples to train a computer to tell us if 2 signature whistles, as the red and the green as you see, are really different or the same, if the computer had problems separating them or not separating them, and that it would give us a quantitative index of how different they were, for example, between a mother and a calf or 2 juveniles. So these are tools we have used, very custom kind of program tools. Now, these are signature whistles from a mom and a calf. Gemini is the mom. And Geo is her son. And what we discovered when we were doing our neural network is that some of these signals were very messy. They were just sloppy, and we couldn't track the contours of the whistle, so we had to throw them out of our data sets for the neural network, which was not really okay because we really wanted to measure all the whistles of all the mother-calf pairs, that sort of thing. Now, with some of these new programs, it'll actually extract these patterns in a different way and allow us to code these signals. So neural nets were great for a while. They didn't get us very far. So the process we really go through is, because we have underwater video and we have sound, we use a program called Observer, which is a behavioral coding software for behavioral biologists. And we basically take a timeline and we will code our body postures, for example. So you might see a head-to-head, a little peck rubbing, another head-to-head, courtship, little courtship behavior, and another reunion or peck-to-peck. So we'll code that on a timeline. And then simultaneously, we'll take our sounds, and you saw a little bit of this in the video, and we'll walk through our vocalizations, and we'll code them in very generic terms. So here we might see a scream. Here we have a signature whistle. Now we have a buzz. And then we have some other really messy kinds of sounds. We don't know how to categorize those. So one of our main impetus for connecting with Thad's group was to really help us get at these categories of sounds, specifically burst pulses, to help categorize things that we human beings aren't very good at, apparently. Again, match this with behavior, and then look for some structure and order to really take a look at, are there really any grammatical rules? Is there structure? Is there anything akin to language or partially akin to human phonemes, for example? So here are 3 spectrograms. 2 are humans, and 1 is a dolphin. Take a quick guess. Which is which? You guys are experts. I bet you're all going to get this right. So anyway, the top one is not a dolphin. That's a human speaking, as is the bottom one. So the middle one are dolphin burst pulse sounds. And you can see they look a little bit like phonemes. We're not saying they are, but these are the structures we're used to sort of looking at and analyzing, right? I know my computer can recognize my voice. But again, is it language? We don't know. This is one way to start looking at it. It's not the only way, because you still have to understand the function and meaning of words if they're there. But we really want to take a look at it now that we have some potential tools. So for example, one thing that we started with the Georgia Tech work was just asking, is a whistle just one unit? That's the way we've always approached it as dolphin researchers. But in fact, could that be parts of whistles that are recombined? And of course, this is critical if you're looking at language, right? We recombine phonemes to make different words in different orders. So some of these tools are being applied through THAAD. There's some dynamic time warping that's been applied with other researchers. But we're pretty excited about these tools. And I'm going to let Thad jump in here and talk about.
So this is a tool called UHURA, which is something we've made at Georgia Tech. This is Daniel Kohlsdorf's PhD dissertation. For those of you who are into machine learning, you can go look it up at Georgia Tech's dissertation database. In particular, we have the spectrogram up here. We have about 40 features here that are learned features as being distinct in the database. Basically looking at convolution, see where those features are in the spectrogram. From those, we try to look for repeating time series, and that's these patterns here. So you take in raw audio, look for the areas that have dolphin vocalization in them, try to find these features, and then from those features, look to see how they recur in time and get a motif. Then you look to see where all those motifs are in time and make sure they look reasonable on the system. From that, we then take this code book and try to explain as much of the audio as we can. So you're just trying to basically reduce this thing to a series of strings. That data reduction really helps us move much more quickly in trying to find repeated patterns. And from that, from these repeated motifs and labeling them, we start finding things that, it turns out, regular expressions. So we just look at how these things reoccur, and to our surprise, regular expressions turn out to be one of the most predictive things for behavior that we know that Denise has observed in the wild. So what we did is took her 2012 field season, took the first half of it, trained up a system. So this is unsupervised learning, where we got the motifs and got the regular expressions, and we tried talking to machine learning people now for a second, tried bag of words, bag of grammars, and bag of regular expressions. It turns out the most predictive thing for the behaviors were bag of regular expressions. And so what we looked at is took the second half of her 2012 database, and looked at the behavior she tagged visually. So she actually saw foraging behavior. She actually saw aggression, mother-calf reunion, or play. Given that, we then say, okay, what sort of motifs, what sort of regular expressions are affiliated with these different types of visual behavior? Can we actually see a correlation with them acoustically? And the answer is yes. And the correlation within class is very high. Correlation across class is very low. This is excellent news for us, because it now starts telling us that yes, there is some stuff here that is discriminative in the acoustic environment. Now the question is, how can you do this on a bigger scale? Doing this sort of stuff takes days of computer power for a relatively small data set.
So these are bottlenose dolphins now, very coordinated. and synchronizing the sounds. And I'll let you just hear it for a second. Two dyads of male dolphins basically competing, and you can hear them synchronizing their sounds and see them orient. A second here. What are they saying? So what we basically want the computer to do is to help us automate categorizing and coding these sounds as the video section you just saw. So we're not manually going through it all the time and build a larger database.
So the system that we showed you before from Daniel Kohl's dissertation is, like I said, quite power hungry. It takes a lot of computation. It's looking at a lot of the spectrogram at the same time. And so it's something that has some problems being parallelized, though we can do it. Certainly can do a lot with bigger iron out there. But we're hoping now to make some things a little faster. So that's what we're showing next. So let you listen to this for a second.
So these are spotted dolphins now. This is aggression, typical spotted aggression.
And now this is a new tool where we're actually doing something similar to the Shazam algorithm, for those who are familiar with that. We're looking at the spectrogram as if it's a computer vision problem, looking for regions, areas of interest. And then we're starting looking at these patterns through time. Now the problem, before we're looking at sort of the distribution of these things and how they change. Now we're looking for something very simple, which is just, the majority of the regions of interest, are they increasing in frequency or decreasing in frequency? And that's what this is down here. And it turns out that's sufficient to actually get an initial annotation of what's going on. So you can see here that it's labeling the red dots are the features. This is sort of the general main feature we're using to cluster on. And you see at the top we have JE, then ED, EJD, EJE. And so later on you can see the EJE as a combined thing. So at the top is basically the individual motifs. The ones that are combined together, those are the starting to be the regular expressions we're seeing. And this is brand new stuff. This just came out this month. We're trying to get this so that Denise can sit there and say, okay, I'm going to load in this database and in, say, minutes as opposed to days, get back some initial results and be able to figure out where to throw more attention and more computational power on. Hopefully we're going to continue to develop this and make this a little bit more sophisticated, but allows her to really tune the parameters a bit and see where our best bets are for future work.
For example, you're going to hear synchronized squawks. So these are adult dolphins. Now you're going to hear juveniles. They're trying to synchronize their squawks. This is something they learn over time. And we're hoping, for example, these tools will help us pull out of our data the specific categories and order of sounds so we can differentiate and look at the process, for example, of development of vocal use in dolphins. Now, the second way we've been interfacing as researchers is to look at, can we incorporate some underwater computer technology real time to try to look at dolphin communication? And we asked the question, is it possible to directly real time communicate with another species? Well, in the Bahamas, we actually have two species of dolphins, bottlenose dolphins you see here. They're about 3 feet larger than the spotteds, but they interact on a regular basis. They forage together sometimes. They babysit each other's young, interspecies babysitting. There's some dominance dynamics between the males of both species, but they'll form temporary alliances when we get another intruder in, like a shark or an unknown bottlenose, for example. So they're already communicating with each other to a certain extent. We've been trying to look at that to pick apart how much they understand, perhaps, of each other's sounds and or behavior. But if we look at the rest of nature, other species are actually decoding each other already. We just aren't in that circle. So we have sentinel warning calls that are used between species with birds and monkeys. Now with cetaceans, with whales and dolphins, we have a couple interesting examples where they're not just listening and taking advantage of knowing an alarm call from another species. When they get together with each other, they actually create a short, it's not a mutual language, but they use mutual signals. So it appears to be easier, at least for whale and dolphin species, to agree on some sounds they use when they're together versus their own communication system, which is pretty interesting. I always thought maybe the way to go is to just decode them. But if you're trying to communicate with another species, maybe you have to spend the time, and maybe it's not culturally possible to learn the intricacies of, a non-human animal communication system. So that's kind of approach we're taking. And what started happening in the Bahamas, we work non-invasively and we try to do behavioral observations, but the dolphins are often interactive with us because we're right in the water with them, we're close, we know them. And they started doing things like mimicking our postures, goofy things like, one time we had, I'll never forget this, a swimmer who was trying to do a dolphin kick, the dolphin kick in the water. And then the dolphin was behind the swimmer going, just spazzing out, because he was not a good dolphin kicker. So they have some funny sense of mimicry, because that's what they do with each other all the time. And sometimes they would, what I would call, try to acoustically mimic us too. And we kept thinking, God, maybe we should really create a tool. I mean, it's a pretty unique situation in the world. These dolphins have time, they're safe, they're pretty friendly, and they seem interested in humans. Now, we have plenty of other examples scientifically of interfaces that have been created with other species. One of the best known, of course, is the work with Kanzi by Sue Savage-Rumbaugh, who over many decades and many different types of work designed a keyboard. So Kanzi could interface and they could go out in the woods and talk about things and share ideas and thoughts. Probably the most technically advanced dolphin-human interface actually happened at the Epcot Center in Orlando, Florida. It was actually an underwater a keyboard that was created so dolphins and humans could both use it. You basically either stuck your hand if you were a human or your beak if you were a dolphin into a hole which broke an infrared beam which triggered a word in English or a whistle in dolphin. And then the dolphin could go and say, let's go to the reef and get a fish, or the human could do that. But it turns out we humans were really slow in the water. So the dolphins would make a command for the humans and go over and they'd wait for the humans to get there. So part of the problem is they're so fast acoustically and physically in the water, of course. So they had pretty good results, no big breakthroughs, but it was really the first example. And there have been historically other people that have developed keyboards for dolphins. But this is really the first true underwater keyboard. So we kind of worked with them for a while on our ideas, and our original vision was, well, we're out there in the boat, we have computers on the boat, let's put a keyboard under the water, we'll have the diver work with the dolphins, explore the keyboard together. Well, we found out pretty quickly that the dolphins have a lot better things to do in the wild than sit at the boat and press the keyboard, right? Fish goes by, they're out of there. So we quickly created a portable keyboard we could push through the water, because we're often swimming hard to keep up with them to see what they're doing. And it was a visual keyboard with a little acoustic sound that was correlated with a specific signal. I think this should play. So this is the whistle for scarf. Okay, there it is. So the idea was we labeled 4 simple objects with whistles that they could mimic, but that were outside of their normal repertoire, because we didn't want to say something inappropriate because we didn't know their language. Like your mother does something with blowfish, I don't know, pufferfish. They do, actually, they get high chewing on pufferfish. Did you know that? They do. Really? Yeah, there was some great footage on the internet not too long ago. They pass around the pufferfish, and they have the fugu, the drug from the liver of the pufferfish. So and every animal has a drug. Yeah. Really? Just enough to get high.
Things you never tell me.
Sorry, I just thought of it. I was trying to make a joke, but. So anyway, sorry about that. So we labeled these 4 objects: scarf, rope, things that we as humans bring in the water and they like to play with and drag around; sargassum, which is a seaweed they play around with; and then a bow ride, which is really high motivation because they like bow rides. So we had this system. It was pretty archaic. This was in the late 90s. And they were interested, but they couldn't really trigger the system with their sound, and we couldn't do any real-time sound recognition, so it was really not good enough. So we said, oh, let's just wait. We'll find some computer geniuses to help us out. So Thad actually came to my lab originally to try to decode the dolphin natural sounds using some of his tools.
And then I made the mistake of saying, oh, we can make your keyboard for you. It'll only take a semester. 5 years later, we actually have a system that we field. We're doing this every summer now. Our most modern one is a stereo 192 kilohertz sampling system. She can actually, we can produce these whistles in the water. We can also listen for them as well. We're finally getting to the stage where we have GPUs in this thing that we can do convolutional filters and start picking up stuff at any frequency they do it at. One of the biggest problems with this box actually is, believe it or not, the speaker. It turns out it's very hard to get enough power in the water to actually communicate. Whenever you see the Navy do this, they have a hydrophone in the water with a big amplifier hooked up to a big generator, right? And they're pushing 200 watts in. We can't exactly put 200 watts into a chest-mounted box. So we've been making our own custom speakers. Yes, I am a speaker manufacturer. You don't want my speakers, though, because they really do not have very good response, but they're very good at certain narrow bands. And we can actually send out these things. While the Dolphins can communicate at 3 miles, we're working on our signals to work at 60 feet. So now we're actually successful. We can actually get these things in the water with enough computational power and enough sound power to actually do two-way communication work. And I'll let Denise tell you what we're trying to do with it.
Yeah, so the system basically, as you see it, the box with a computer, 2 hydrophones to receive the sound, speakers to play the sound, and then the operator has a keypad with the pre-programmed sounds in it. Here you see pictures of us getting our boxes on to go in the water. We actually practice in the water with the boxes without the dolphins because we want to be ready for how they try to mess us up when we're trying to do things with them. And the whole system here is designed on modeling the communication system because the only thing that has worked with other species, primates, Irene Pepperberg's work with birds, is the idea that you want to show the species how to use the system. It's like your kids are exposed to human communication as they're growing up, right? They see you going to the refrigerator for milk, you talk about milk, you offer them milk. It's the same idea, is that you don't want to throw the species in there and go, okay, perform, do what we want you to do. So if my colleague Adam wants to get the scarf from me in the water, he has to use his keyboard, he has to ask for scarf, he has to come over and get it, and then we exchange it. So we practice that. We usually put a third person in to be a dolphin and try to mess us up and ask for things we don't have and that sort of thing. And so we learn how to respond appropriately. And then when the dolphins come around, we have small time frames. I call them windows of opportunity, where they aren't doing their normal behavior. They're there to play. They're ready to engage. And we just try to tap into those moments. And we can be in the water, I don't know, an hour, 2 hours sometimes with them, where we're exchanging these toys and playing sounds and having them see the system. So the idea is diver A and diver B have a box on with a computer. Diver A can play the scarf whistle, so that diver B is going to hear it as a word. We wear these bone-conducting earphones. So diver B would hear it as a scarf. The dolphin would hear it as a whistle. Or diver B could play a sound, a sargassum whistle, same thing. Diver A hears it as an English word, so they're sure what went out. The dolphin would hear it as a different whistle. And then the hope is that the dolphins will mimic the whistle, and then diver A and diver B would be notified in the earphone that, that whistle was made, sargassum or scarf. And then the appropriate toy would be given to the dolphin, and we'd swim off into the sunset together, playing with our toys. So it's a simple system, but dolphins can mimic sounds really well, but to get them to understand the function of a sound is a whole other level. So it's all about exposure, repeating the sound to them, showing them how it's used, so that they start, if they want the toy, they could ask us for the toy. For example, we also, in the system, we have our own signature whistles made, so we have names. So I have a Denise whistle, for example. We also have some of the dolphins' names in the computer because we have a very small subset of dolphins that work with us on a regular basis. So we have their signature whistles in the computer. So if they come up, we can actually greet them with their name, which is what they do with each other, and then we can engage in this behavior. So it's a potential tool. This is actually some underwater video of the work. So there's 2 people in the water, both with boxes. I've got the yellow scarf.
They can't hear you when that.
Yeah, sorry. I've got the yellow scarf. We've just labeled it for the dolphins. I've just asked for the scarf using the whistle. Bethany gives me the scarf. Now I'm going to offer it to the dolphins. I'm going to label it as I offer it. And then we try to get the scarf back, which we don't always.
She loses a lot of scarves.
But it's interesting, just last year, we try to ask for the scarf back too, and every once in a while they'll drop it. And so we're hopeful that there may be understanding that I've asked for the scarf, not sargassum or the rope, et cetera. So this year we're gonna have the new computers. And now the great thing about this next summer is we finally have data for what the dolphins have been trying to do with us. For example, they've been trying to mimic these whistles in ways that the computer wasn't set up to recognize. For example, they'll put little additions to our whistle on it, or they're doing some high frequency stuff that the computer's not recognizing, but now we're gonna
Yeah, one of our biggest
use that
problems
data.
was we were sampling at 22 kilohertz at first, because normally we're between 7 and 10. But it turns out that when we went back and looked, there was some evidence of mimicry at double the frequency. And we just simply didn't have a computer board fast enough to deal with it. And it is not till this year that we actually have a GPU based system where we can actually look for the same pattern no matter what frequency it's at. So we know that they can reduce whistles much higher than we were looking at before, but now we should be able to cover the whole range of whistles, not the whole range of burst pulse, but the whole range of whistles, and be able to process that in real time.
And to know what they're trying to do is really helpful, so now we can react more in human time. So the whole idea of the system is to empower the dolphins to communicate with us, so we're not just giving them orders or commands, and to see how far it'll go. And the hope is that with the decoding software of their natural sounds, we can eventually figure out some motifs or patterns we could loop back into the two-way system and see if we can use more of their signals in the system than our artificially created whistles. So, breaking the communication barrier for humans and other animals, it's a pretty interesting concept. We haven't really tried it on a grand scale. Can machine learning help? I'm pretty convinced after working with dolphins and these sounds for 30 plus years that you guys are our only hope, is that we really need these power tools, and we need the expertise that you've all done in your various fields for just recognizing human speech in many ways. And I really think that's going to help us really crack the code with a lot of other animals, not just dolphins, but the tools will really be applicable, I think, across disciplines.
And that's one of the things that, those of you who do machine learning, part of the hardest part of the problem is just getting good data sets. Well, Denise has 32 years of it. We're slowly getting it to the stage where it's cleaned enough that machine learning can really, techniques can really be used on it. Really understanding it well enough that we can figure out when there's dolphin vocalization and when there's not. And we really think that these machine learning techniques really can help, and we've done a first pass at, which is really showing some promise. However, one of the big problems is simply resources, right? We need more smart people to look at this data set, and to try different methods. So there's the method that we're using. Those of you who are familiar with the machine learning approaches here, it's sort of a different take on it. And so what we really wanted to do is get a little team together and see if we can get some progress here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so we're trying to put working groups together If you want to help support our regular work, please go to our website, Wild Dolphin Project, and we have memberships. We have the Chat Society.
And there's also some small projects out there at Interspeech, for those of you who go to that conference, specializes on animal-computer interaction. There's also an animal-computer interaction conference that's now part of ACM that has a yearly meeting. And so it's now starting to get a small cadre of researchers. They're not just looking at marine mammals, but also birds and primates and all sorts of animals, seeing if we can come upon some common tools and common methods to go forward and see if we really can crack this code of what these animals are doing with their communication.
Great.
So thank you very much, and I'll run around with a microphone and take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting. Do you have any idea what the dolphins think of you? Are they there for play? What are they maybe trying to communicate? Do you have any idea?
You know, it's a really unique situation because they have, I won't say an easy life, but they have a well-resourced life. So they have fish. They don't have a lot of predators. There's not a lot of human impact. So they have time to play with each other and apparently humans when we're there. I don't know. I don't know what they think of us. I think they think we're funny in the water. I think they think we provide bow rides and some interesting entertainment. But, I really think intelligence seeks intelligence. And I think they really recognize another species of interest, like they do with the bottlenose who are out there and other species.
I think they make fun of me.
Well, that's for sure.
I'm not a very strong swimmer. And so one day I was out there with Denise and got some water in my mask. So I was doing mask clearing. And I was just floundering around. And they all ignored her and came and just circled me and just all stood the same way I'm standing in the waters going, are you dying? Can we watch?
I'm surprised I didn't drag you back to the boat. We've actually had them help like a struggling swimmer before, escort them back to the boat because they recognize that.
They definitely a sense of play.
Yeah. So we'll see. I'd like to know.
Yeah, fun.
I want to thank you very much for the wonderful talk. A very interesting project. I have a question for you and also a question for that. So you said your research does not require attaching any physical things to the dolphin. So when you acquire the data, you are always at some close proximity to the dolphins. So how do you know that the data that you have is all they're saying, right? And also a question to that, the approach that you used to cluster all of these regex expressions, why don't you, or maybe you have, like one idea would be to just run it on human voice and see whether it can find out patterns in what people are saying.
First.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So we're in the water, we're in close proximity. It's pretty hard to build a dolphin blind, and we've tried sticking a camera over a boat and, but we feel that if they're habituated to us and we're not grabbing them and poking them, they basically start behaving and we try to record their behavior. Now, it's most likely that we're not recording everything they say, absolutely. And we've toyed with doing things like putting passive acoustic devices down on the seafloor, which is only 20, 40 feet deep, just to record when we're not there, of course. But they move around a lot, so it's a little challenging. We've thought about building some kind of drone. Like, I'd love to do an underwater remora that could attach to them and just go with them when we can't and record sounds. I mean, you could do that. You can do that kind of stuff now, right? So that would be pretty cool. I'm sure there's things they're saying that we haven't heard.
And the sound is
absolutely.
directional too. They can actually select one person, in this audience, and the other people can't hear it. So they can be very directional with their high frequency stuff. So yes, we're missing stuff. We know we're missing stuff. Hopefully, if this two-way work, and you could hear them in the water too, right? Because you get lower frequency stuff, so you kind of know when they're aiming at you. It's a problem. We're just hoping to get enough data that we can deal with that issue. Now, as far as running it on human language, we've run it on sign language actually, and a data set that I made as part of my master's thesis back in the mid-90s. And it actually finds half those signs, right, from the video features. We've done more recently with Connect data for sign language. It does the same thing. We're doing it on synthesized synthetic speech. We're doing it on MIT's OpenCourseWare lectures, the TIMIT data set, OCR, a lot of things where we know what the answer is. And it performs really well. We have an exercise database too, where it's just exercise routines, and it discovers all 6 of the exercises, and the automatic recognizers get 97% accuracy. So, the algorithms are doing well on these well-constrained problems. But this is the aspirational work. Can we actually make it work on something we don't know the answer to? Can it work well enough we can at least help Denise get somewhere on this data set? Because we don't have to be perfect. We don't even have to be that good. We just have to accelerate what she's doing. That's our hard thing.
So if I understood the correlation that was being done between alphabets and patterns or features being extracted, right? So it sounded like we were trying to take the English approach, the English language approach, and equate pieces of sounds to alphabets. I'm wondering whether there's a room to take the Chinese language philosophy and take a character to a whole phrase or a meaning or a sentence, right? Mm-hmm. And use that, especially when it comes to could there be portions of the language, and this is probably the second question, that are actually singing, nothing to do with communication, just plain singing, cooing, comfort noises, things like that, or just singing in rhythmic tones, hypnotic tones, right?
Yeah.
That's the second question.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a lot of, hopefully we get this algorithm, we get some of that, both issues. There's a lot of work on zebra finch, that sort of thing, as far as just bird song. And we can get, when we're doing human speech, we get things like coughs and sneezes and just a microphone against the person's lapel. And a lot of that stuff is actually useful because you can get rid of the noise. You characterize the types of noise, you get rid of it, right? And anybody who does speech recognition tells you that's important. Now, as far as how much do these individual units mean, is it a compositional or is it wholly on their own? Don't know.
But regarding that whistle question, so your question about is it Chinese Mandarin, where you have the different inflections of the tonal, right? So that would be something that the system could pick up as far as if it was a combination, the tail end went up or went down, et cetera. Now, decades ago, people thought about this issue, and they looked at whistle languages in humans in the mountainous areas, for example, the Pyrenees and just a few other areas in the world, to look at how much content goes between those mountains when one guy is whistling to another and coming home. So some of it ended up being contextual, like they knew it was Joe over here and Fred was whistling, and they knew it was mealtime, so he was probably going to go get some bread and get some food for dinner, whatever. But that has been speculated on. But the part of the trick here is that whistles are a really small part of their communication, and these other kinds of sounds, which are the really hard ones to categorize, the burst pulses that are more like phonemes, really, they are the ones that we're really lacking an understanding of their function, their categories, and all that. So that's part of why we started, because people have really gone through the whistle stuff a lot.
And the thing is, the Konsolobodjikov's work on prairie dogs is really quite astonishing. In 200 milliseconds, 0.2 seconds, right? These prairie dogs are encoding what type of predator is there. So you can actually watch this yourself. If it's a hawk, right, and they give a long call, everybody goes into the burrow. If it's a snake, they'll sit there and stand up and look at it, right? And so Kahn has shown that they can encode in this 0.2 seconds the shape and size of the object that's impinging upon their territory, right? So if these prairie dogs can, and they do this in these higher harmonics, if these prairie dogs can do it, right, what can these dolphins do? And so one of the things we've been looking at is one of the grant proposals we put together is trying to take all the stuff that he painfully put together over 20 years, all these experiments and all this data he's collected. Can we actually take a look at his data where we know what the answer is and rediscover it using our techniques? We haven't gone there yet. That was part of grant proposals being evaluated right now. But we're hoping to not only just do Denise's work, but a lot of these other animal vocalization specialists see if we can get their databases and see if we can accelerate stuff for them, and for the ones we know the answers to, see if it actually pulls them out as well.
You mentioned in the Dolphin Diary that very occasionally Atlantic spotted dolphin let you babysit their calves. You also mentioned it's not really a great idea. I don't.
Oh, that they'll give us the.
Yeah, so I don't know if like any incident has happened, and like, what do you plan to do if there's a shock attack in that?
So what he's referring to is I describe in my book how, because we know that I've grown up with a lot of these dolphins. They're grandmothers now, but I knew them when they were born, and I know their grandkids and all that. And so occasionally, they'll come to the boat and we'll be anchored and we'll be in the water with them, and the moms will leave their calves with us and they'll take off. Like you go, that might not be a very smart thing to do, but they figure, well, I got to go forward, so take care of Junior for a while. We're like, yeah, right, what are we going to do? You know, if a shark shows up, it's going to block him. But, I mean, they don't go far, and it's not like if the calf made a noise, they wouldn't come swimming and running, you know. But, but what I find interesting about that is that it's kind of like they are incorporating you in their society, and they're smart enough to not put their calf in danger, at least I hope so, because that wouldn't be very survival driven. But it is interesting, and that's why, you know, I think the link is there to really go further. It's just that, you know, we have to meet them, we have to bridge the gap with our technology, I think is the trick.
I'm wondering, like, since you've been observing dolphins for such a long time, do you observe some like young dolphin like born without such a full pattern of like dolphin vocabulary, then gradually they kind of learned this?
You know, the watching young dolphins develop has actually been one of the biggest things for our work. Because when I first went out there, you know, I'd see the adults fighting or the adults mating, and so you get a sense of, oh, that's what they do, that's the ritual. But when you see the little guys, they're trying and they're fumbling and they're learning and they're getting feedback from their cohort. So yeah, absolutely, they're learning social rules, they're learning sound restrictions. I'm sure when to make sound, when to not. Like we've had a couple young calves that were real squeakers. We'd hear them coming from miles away, you know, and we could tell who it was, a little freedom. And I'd be like, shut up, you're shark bait, stop it, you know. And sure enough, you know, 2 months later, she shows up with a big chunk out of her fluke. Someone bit her. And then it happened again, and it's like, come on, you have to quiet down. And finally her mom, I guess, convinced her to shut up and not be so vocal. But yeah, they absolutely go through the learning process, and they don't always learn sufficiently, and they do die and get in trouble, of course. But yeah, absolutely. And other researchers have taken dolphin vocalization databases and applied information theory to them and looked at, do little dolphins babble like little human kids do, and then gradually refine their sounds? And in fact, they do. The information is constrained and given feedback. And so yeah, absolutely, it's a process.
I'm just wondering if you have any sense of the upper limit of the frequency dolphins are able to hear at, and also, are there any differences in the way a dolphin might hear relative to how a human hears, and do you capture that?
So dolphins have been tested, at least some species, and had audiograms made, and it looks like their hearing has a couple different sensitivity peaks. So they hear best around 30 to 40 kilohertz, and then they have another bimodal peak at about 100 to 120 kilohertz. Now, researchers haven't measured much higher than that because it looks like it drops around 120. But on the recording side, just recently, the last few years, people have recorded sounds up to about 240 kilohertz. So for some reason, they're making sounds higher than we think they can hear. So that's a question mark. And yeah, of course, their ears are completely different. They have mammalian ears. They have certain specializations, of course, a lot of high frequency, you know, inner hair cells and a lot of turns in the cochlea and stuff. Yeah, so they're adapted to their environment, certainly. They can produce really loud sounds, like 180 decibels, or 220 decibels, which underwater is like a blasting cap. You know, it's a lot of energy because of the medium, right? And they do crazy things with their sounds, which I could get into in some crazy detail, like they can phase out signals to block, you know, certain parts of the bandwidth. So there's some pretty complicated stuff going on there, which we're just starting to get at.
We're seeing some crazy stuff with the chat work
really
that we don't understand yet. It's like, you know, is that intentional or not? Because it's really, some of the stuff they're doing acoustically is really wacky.